10 years ago, my husband packed his bags, looked at our deaf daughter and called her a broken burden he could no longer afford. He walked out to start a new life with his mistress, leaving us with absolutely nothing but unpaid medical bills and eviction notices. Tonight, as the auctioneer dropped his heavy brass hammer securing a record-breaking $3.6 million for my daughter's masterpiece, the gallery doors slammed open. There he stood with a smug lawyer and that exact same mistress who is now his wife, stepping into the spotlight to claim what he never earned. Little did he know he was walking straight into a financial death trap that would cost him his freedom and leave him begging for mercy. My name is Audrey. I am 35 years old, and I am the fiercely proud mother of a silent genius. Before I tell you how we systematically dismantled my ex-husband's life forever, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that true karma always comes to collect its debts, especially when it concerns a mother protecting her child. The air inside the exclusive Manhattan art gallery was electric, humming with the low murmurs of wealthy collectors and elite critics. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the stark white walls, but all eyes were fixed on the center stage. My 18-year-old daughter, Mia, stood quietly beside me. She wore a simple black dress, her hands resting calmly by her sides. Because she was born completely deaf, the chaotic sounds of the bidding war were lost on her, but she could feel the heavy vibrations of the crowd and read the shifting energy in the room. We were watching her signature painting titled "The Silence of a Father" drive the room into an absolute frenzy. It was a massive, hauntingly beautiful canvas depicting a shadowy figure walking away into a storm, leaving behind a vibrant, glowing child. The bidding had started at $50,000, a respectable amount for a debut artist. But within 20 minutes, it had skyrocketed past 1 million, then 2 million, fueled by two anonymous phone bidders who refused to back down. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack my chest. I squeezed Mia's hand, tears of overwhelming pride stinging my eyes. I remembered the years I spent working triple shifts at a local diner just to afford her high-quality paints and canvases. I remembered the countless nights we sat on the floor of our tiny, unheated apartment, communicating in American Sign Language about her dreams of showing the world what she could see, even if she could not hear it. Every sacrifice, every moment of crushing exhaustion led to this exact second. $3.6 million going once the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing through the massive room. He scanned the crowd, his wooden gavel raised high. $3.6 million going twice. Sold to the anonymous buyer on the main line. The heavy brass hammer struck the wooden podium with a sharp, definitive crack. The entire gallery erupted into deafening applause. Flashes from cameras blinded us. People were standing up cheering for the young, beautiful deaf girl who had just shattered records. I pulled Mia into a tight embrace, burying my face in her shoulder, letting the tears stream freely down my face. She hugged me back fiercely, pulling away just enough to sign the words, "We did it, Mom." But the warmth of our triumph did not even last 5 minutes. Just as the auctioneer gestured for us to come forward to accept the ceremonial congratulations, the massive double oak doors at the back of the gallery violently swung open. The heavy thud echoed over the fading applause, silencing the room almost instantly. I turned around and the blood instantly drained from my face. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. Striding down the center aisle, acting as if he owned the entire building, was Jason. My ex-husband. The man who had abandoned us a decade ago. He was wearing a sharply tailored, expensive navy suit, a fake bright smile plastered across his face. Clinging tightly to his arm was Brittany, the woman he had left me for, dripping in flashy diamond jewelry and wearing a smug, triumphant grin. Trailing right behind them was a tall man in a gray suit carrying a thick leather briefcase, having the unmistakable arrogant posture of an expensive corporate lawyer. The crowd parted for them, confused murmurs replacing the celebratory cheers. Jason did not even look at me. He walked straight past me, bumping my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. He stepped right up to the podium, aggressively snatching the microphone directly from the stunned auctioneer's hand. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight to support my little girl. Jason, announced, his voice booming through the speakers, dripping with a sickeningly sweet, fake warmth. I am Jason Mia's father. You cannot imagine how incredibly proud I am to see my daughter's talent recognized on this magnificent scale. Ever since I bought her very first set of paintbrushes, I knew she was destined for absolute greatness. Gasps rippled through the front row. I stood frozen in pure shock at the sheer audacity of his lies. He had never bought her a single brush. He had called her art a ridiculous waste of money. Jason wrapped his free arm around Brittany, pulling her close to the podium. As her father and her legal guardian, I am stepping in to officially manage her estate and this newly acquired wealth. Jason continued, looking directly at the cameras flashing in the back of the room. We want to ensure that her $3.6 million is properly protected and invested for her future and not squandered away by people who do not understand financial management. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold, predatory gleam. He smiled a terrifyingly confident smirk that told me he thought he had already won. I felt the heat rising in my chest, replacing the shock with a blinding volcanic rage. The 10 years of peace I had built for my daughter were over, and the war had just walked right through the front door. I did not think. I simply moved. The heavy fabric of my dress swept against the polished hardwood floor as I marched down the center aisle. The murmurs of the crowd faded into a dull roar in my ears. All I saw was his smug, arrogant face basking in the glow of my daughter's monumental achievement. A man who had not paid a single medical bill, who had not held her hand during her hardest days, was now trying to steal her glory. I reached the podium before his expensive lawyer could even react. Jason opened his mouth, likely to offer me some patronizing greeting for the cameras. He never got the chance. I swung my hand back and slapped him across the face with every ounce of strength I possessed. The sharp crack of my palm against his cheek echoed through the silent gallery like a gunshot. The microphone let out a high-pitched squeal as Jason stumbled backward, clutching his face in absolute shock. The red imprint of my hand immediately bloomed across his jaw. The crowd gasped in unison. A few people pulled out their phones, the flashbulbs lighting up the tense space. "Are you completely insane?" Brittany shrieked, rushing forward to grab his arm. She glared at me, her diamond earrings shaking. "You cannot just assault people because you are jealous, you crazy woman." I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Jason, who was now straightening his tie. His mask of the loving father slipping to reveal the cold, calculating narcissist underneath. "You have no right to be here," I said, my voice dangerously low, but carrying enough weight to reach the front rows. "You have no right to speak her name. You are not her father. You are just the sperm donor who abandoned her when she needed you the most." Jason quickly recovered, raising his hands in a gesture of peaceful surrender, playing straight to the audience. "Please, Audrey," he said loudly, making sure his voice carried to the reporters in the back. "There is no need for this hostility. I know you are emotional. I know you have spent years trying to keep my daughter away from me, filling her head with lies. But I am here now. I am here to protect her future." Lies. I scoffed, taking a step closer, forcing him to shrink back against the wooden podium. "You want to talk about lies in front of all these people? Let us talk about the truth. You did not care about being a father when you walked out 10 years ago without leaving a single dime for groceries. You did not care about her future when you emptied our joint bank account to fund your pathetic tech startup and take your mistress to the Bahamas. That is defamation." The gray-suited lawyer finally barked, stepping between us. He adjusted his glasses, looking at me with pure disdain. "My client has every legal right to be here. He is listed on the birth certificate. He is her biological father, and given her profound disability, he is legally stepping in to ensure her $3.6 million estate is managed properly. Disability. I repeated the word, tasting like poison in my mouth. My daughter is deaf. She is not incompetent. She just sold a painting for more money than you or your client will make in a lifetime. She does not need a manager, and she certainly does not need a parasite who only showed up because he smelled cash. Jason leaned around his lawyer, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. You can play the angry, bitter ex-wife all you want, Audrey, he hissed, his voice dropping so only the people closest could hear. But I am not going anywhere. I have rights. She is 18 now, but she is vulnerable. The courts will see exactly what this is. A struggling single mother who cannot possibly handle a multi-million-dollar trust. I felt a hand gently touch my shoulder. I turned and saw Mia standing right behind me. Her face was completely unreadable. She did not look scared, and she did not look angry. She looked at Jason the way one might look at a strange, unpleasant insect on the sidewalk. She pulled out her iPad, her fingers flying across the screen. She held it up for Jason to read. The text was large and bold. You are blocking my painting. Move. The crowd erupted into a mix of shocked laughter and loud applause. Jason's face turned a deep, furious shade of crimson. He opened his mouth to shout at her, but Brittany pulled his sleeve, whispering frantically in his ear. The narrative he wanted to spin of the loving, rejected father was already crumbling. But Jason did not come unprepared. He gestured to his lawyer, who calmly opened his leather briefcase. The fight was far from over. The gray-suited lawyer pulled a thick stack of stapled papers from his briefcase. Before he could even hand them to me, Brittany snatched them from his grasp. She stepped forward, her high heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She invaded my personal space, her overpowering, expensive perfume burning my nose. The smirk on her face was completely unbearable, the look of a woman who thought she had just won the lottery using someone else's ticket. You might want to read this very carefully, Audrey, Brittany said, her voice dripping with venomous joy. She practically shoved the papers into my chest, forcing me to take them or let them fall to the floor. I grabbed the stack, my eyes scanning the bold black text at the top of the first page. Temporary injunction and asset freezing order. My blood ran ice cold. I looked down at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was signed by a family court judge just hours ago. They had planned this down to the minute, waiting for the auction to finalize before dropping the hammer. Since you seem to be having trouble processing reality, let me explain it to you in simple terms, Brittany announced loudly, turning her body so the cameras and the wealthy collectors could hear every single word. That document is a court order. It means that as of right now, all funds generated from this auction are legally frozen. The money will be held in a third-party escrow account. You cannot touch a single cent of that $3.6 million, not one penny. Gasps and hushed whispers immediately broke out across the gallery. The elite art collectors who moments ago were cheering for Mia were now exchanging scandalous looks. In their world, money was power, and public financial disputes were treated like thrilling spectator sports. I could feel their judging eyes burning into my back. You really thought it would be that easy, did not you? Brittany mocked, stepping even closer, lowering her voice just a fraction, but keeping her tone razor sharp. Did you genuinely believe a glorified gallery manager, pulling in what may be $60,000 a year, could just walk away with millions of dollars? You live in a tiny rundown house. You buy your clothes off the discount rack. You do not know the first thing about managing real wealth. Jason is simply stepping in to save his daughter from your financial incompetence. I gripped the papers so tightly the edges crinkled in my hands. I read the specific clauses they had used to secure the injunction. They had weaponized my daughter's deafness. The document claimed that because Mia was profoundly deaf, she was highly susceptible to undue influence and financial exploitation by her primary caregiver, me. They were painting me as a predator in my own daughter's life. You are disgusting, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of pure anger and disbelief. Both of you. You do not care about Mia. You never have. You just saw a payday and brought a lawyer to do your dirty work because your own tech company is bleeding money. Do not think I do not know about your failing startup, Jason. Jason stepped up beside Brittany, placing a protective hand on her lower back. His smile was completely gone now, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. It does not matter what you think you know, Audrey, he said flatly. What matters is the law. And the law says a judge agrees there is enough reasonable doubt about your motives to freeze the assets. You are not taking my daughter's money to fund your pathetic lifestyle. We will see you in court, where a real judge will assign me as her financial conservator. The sheer audacity of his words made me physically sick. He had walked out 10 years ago, leaving us to starve, and now he was standing in front of New York's elite calling me the thief. The whispers from the crowd grew louder. I heard fragments of their conversations. Words like conservatorship, gold digger, and tragic situation drifted into my ears. The narrative was shifting exactly the way Jason and Brittany wanted. I looked around the room, feeling the crushing weight of isolation. The gallery owner, who had been my mentor for years, looked away nervously, clearly terrified of the bad press. The buyers were whispering to their assistants. I was a single mother standing against a man who knew how to manipulate the legal system, and a woman who enjoyed watching me suffer. They had frozen the money. They had publicly humiliated me. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought because I was panicking, they had already won the war. But they had forgotten who the real mastermind actually was. While I was suffocating under the weight of the temporary injunction, my daughter was already 10 steps ahead. People often mistake deafness for a lack of awareness, but missing one sense only sharpens the others. Mia had spent her entire life studying the world in absolute silence. She could read lips from across a crowded room. She could decipher a person's true intentions simply by watching the microscopic shifts in their facial muscles. She had been watching Jason and Brittany since the moment they broke through those doors. I felt a gentle tug on my arm. Mia reached over and pulled the thick stack of legal papers right out of my trembling hands. She did not look panicked. Her face was a perfect mask of chilling serenity. Her dark eyes rapidly scanned the dense legal jargon, absorbing the details of the asset freezing order with the terrifying comprehension of a seasoned attorney. Jason saw her looking at the document and immediately recognized a golden opportunity. He caught the eye of the freelance photographer his lawyer had brought along and gave a subtle nod. The photographer raised his heavy lens, ready to capture the touching reunion of a father saving his disabled child. Jason stepped away from Brittany and moved toward Mia. He softened his posture, letting his shoulders slump slightly to project an aura of weary paternal love. He crafted a look of profound sorrow on his face. "Mia, sweetheart." Jason cooed, speaking loudly and over-articulating his words as if she were a toddler instead of a brilliant young woman. "I know you are confused. I know this is scary, but Daddy is here now. I am going to fix everything your mother ruined." He reached out his hand, aiming to rest it gently on her shoulder for the perfect front-page photograph. He never made contact. Before his fingers could even brush the fabric of her black dress, Mia reacted with explosive speed. She stepped back and violently shoved his arm away. The force of her push caught Jason completely off guard, making him stumble sideways into his expensive lawyer. The gallery erupted in fresh gasps. The photographer snapped several rapid-fire pictures capturing Jason's shocked off-balance expression. "Do not be afraid, sweetheart." Jason recovered quickly, holding his hands up defensively. "I am your father. I would never hurt you." Mia did not even blink. She smoothly pulled her iPad from the small black tote bag hanging on her shoulder. Her fingers flew across the digital keyboard with practiced rhythmic speed. She flipped the screen around, holding it high so Jason, Brittany, the lawyer, and every single camera in the room could clearly read the bold text. "I do not know you. Do not touch me." The silence that followed was absolute. Mia held the screen steady, her eyes locked onto Jason's, with a gaze so fiercely intimidating that he actually had to look away first. But Jason was a masterful manipulator. He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and turned to the crowd with a devastated, heartbroken expression. He looked directly at the reporters. "Look at what she has done to my little girl," Jason announced, his voice cracking with perfectly simulated grief. He pointed an accusing finger directly at my chest. 10 years. For 10 years I have tried to reach out. And for 10 years this bitter woman has systematically poisoned my daughter's mind against me. That is an absolute lie, I fired back, my voice echoing loudly. You never called once. You never sent a single card. This is a textbook case of severe parental alienation, Jason's lawyer interrupted, stepping forward to shield his client. He addressed the crowd and the cameras with professional authority. Audrey has exploited this young woman's disability to isolate her from her biological father. Mia's tragic hostility tonight is exactly why we secured the injunction. She has been brainwashed. She is not capable of making independent financial decisions because her primary caregiver has manipulated her entire reality. Brittany nodded vigorously, dabbing at fake tears in the corners of her eyes. It is just so heartbreaking to watch a mother do this to her own flesh and blood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear them apart with my bare hands. They were twisting Mia's strength and independence into proof of my supposed abuse. They were building a narrative to steal her money and her autonomy in one brutal sweep. The gallery owner finally stepped between us, visibly sweating and desperate to end the public spectacle. Audrey, Jason. Please, the owner pleaded. You need to take this outside. My clients are incredibly uncomfortable. The auction is over. Jason buttoned his suit jacket, his fake sorrow instantly vanishing into a cold, victorious smirk as he looked at me. He leaned in close, lowering his voice so only I could hear. Enjoy your empty bank account tonight, Audrey. I will be at your house first thing in the morning to check on my daughter's living conditions. Have the coffee ready. With that, Jason turned on his heel and walked out of the gallery, his lawyer and his smug wife trailing right behind him. The flashbulbs followed them out the door. I stood there shaking, the frozen legal document lying on the floor at my feet. The wealthy patrons began filtering out quickly, avoiding my gaze like I had a contagious disease. I felt completely defeated. But then Mia gently grabbed my hand. I looked down at her. She was not crying. She was not scared. She simply gave my hand 2 firm squeezes. In our private language, that meant only one thing. Let them come. I did not sleep that night. I sat at our small kitchen table watching the digital clock slowly tick toward morning. Mia was asleep in her room, entirely undisturbed by the storm brewing outside our walls. At exactly 7 in the morning, the harsh flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser sliced through my living room curtains, casting aggressive shadows across the worn hardwood floor. The heavy, authoritative pounding on my front door rattled the cheap hinges. Jason had made good on his threat to destroy our peace. I tightened the belt of my robe, took a deep breath to steady my racing heart, and opened the door. The crisp morning air hit my face, but it was the sight on my small chipped wooden porch that truly chilled me to the bone. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my welcome mat, looking grim and entirely serious. Standing right behind them, practically vibrating with eager anticipation, were Jason and Brittany. Jason was dressed in a casual but clearly expensive cashmere sweater, perfectly playing the role of the deeply concerned, wealthy father. Brittany was clutching a designer coffee cup, looking at my modest, single-story home as if it were a toxic biohazard zone. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, his voice deep and highly practiced. "Are you Audrey?" "Yes, I am," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "How can I help you, officers?" We received an urgent call regarding a welfare check at this exact address. The second officer explained, resting a hand casually on his duty belt. "We were informed that an 18-year-old disabled dependent resides here in an unfit and potentially dangerous environment. We need to come inside to verify the living conditions and check on the well-being of your daughter." I gripped the edge of the doorframe so tightly my knuckles turned white. I looked past the officers glaring directly into Jason's eyes. A welfare check. My daughter is a perfectly healthy, incredibly successful 18-year-old woman. She just sold a painting for $3.6 million last night. Does this look like a dangerous environment to you? Jason stepped forward, his face etched with fake sorrow. Officers, please understand. She is profoundly deaf. She cannot hear a simple fire alarm. She cannot hear an intruder breaking through a window. And frankly, this house is practically falling apart. Look at the rotting wood on the porch. I just want to make sure my little girl is safe. As her biological father, it is my legal right and my moral duty to ensure she is not living in squalor while her mother squanders her newfound wealth. Brittany scoffed loudly, stepping up beside Jason. She looked me up and down with absolute unfiltered disgust. Let us be completely honest here, Audrey. You were a high school dropout who got knocked up at 17. You spent the last decade flipping greasy burgers and scrubbing diner floors just to keep the lights on. You do not even have central air conditioning in this tiny shack. Now that Mia has real money, you are just going to hoard it and keep her trapped in this pathetic dump. You have always been lower-class trash, and Jason is simply trying to rescue his disabled daughter from your miserable life. The sheer venom in her words was a calculated, vicious attack. It was designed to break me, to make me scream and look mentally unstable in front of the police. 10 years ago, the shame of my teenage pregnancy and my grueling poverty might have made me cry. I used to feel immense guilt for not giving Mia a massive mansion. But not today. Today, her nasty words just fueled the raging fire burning in my stomach. You are standing on my private property, Brittany, I said, my voice dangerously calm and razor-sharp. And unless you want me to press formal charges for trespassing, you will shut your mouth and step off my porch immediately. The tall officer held up a hand, trying to forcefully de-escalate the rising tension. Mom, we understand this is a highly emotional domestic dispute. However, when we get a sworn complaint about a vulnerable disabled person, we are legally obligated by the state to lay eyes on them and assess the living environment. It will only take 5 minutes of your time. Please step aside and let us walk inside the house. I stood my ground, planting my feet firmly, my body blocking the doorway entirely. With all due respect, officer, I know my legal rights. You do not have a search warrant signed by a judge. My daughter is a legal adult. Being deaf does not make her an incompetent ward of the state, and it certainly does not give my absentee ex-husband the right to use the local police department as a personal weapon to harass us in our own home. Audrey, stop being so utterly unreasonable, Jason snapped, dropping his concerned dad act for a split second to reveal the ruthless tyrant underneath. You are just making things exponentially worse for yourself. If you do not let them in voluntarily right now, they will just come back with a court order and take her away in handcuffs if they have to. Do not make a massive scene. The two officers exchanged a very tense, significant look. The taller one took a deliberate step closer to me, his posture stiffening aggressively. Mom, if you continue to actively obstruct a mandated welfare check, we will have no choice but to detain you for interfering with a police investigation. We need to see Mia right now, or you are going in the back of the cruiser. Go ahead and put the cuffs on me right now, I said, holding both of my wrists out toward the tall officer. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stared him dead in the eyes, with a chilling composure that clearly caught him completely off guard. If you want to arrest a mother for protecting her child from the exact monster who permanently disabled her, then you go right ahead and read me my rights, but this man is not stepping 1 foot inside my home. The two officers hesitated. Their hands hovered awkwardly near their utility belts. They were trained to deal with screaming, hysterical civilians, not a woman standing her ground with absolute ice-cold conviction. Audrey, stop being so dramatic, Jason groaned, rolling his eyes as if my resistance was just a minor inconvenience to his morning schedule. Officers, this is exactly the kind of unhinged behavior I am talking about. She is unstable. Please just move her aside. You want to talk about unstable? I snapped, keeping my eyes locked firmly on the officers, refusing to give Jason the satisfaction of my attention. Let me tell you why this deeply concerned father really left 10 years ago. Let me tell you exactly why my daughter cannot hear your sirens today. The shorter officer shifted his weight, suddenly looking highly uncomfortable with the situation. Ma'am, we do not need to get into family history. We just need to verify the girl's safety. You need to hear this if you are going to act as his personal attack dogs. I fired back, my voice rising just enough to command the entire porch. 10 years ago, my daughter was 8 years old. She was an approved candidate for a highly specialized cochlear implant surgery. The doctors told us there was a very strict time-sensitive window to perform the procedure before her auditory nerve degraded completely. My insurance covered most of it, but we needed exactly $5,000 out of pocket to secure the operation date. I paused, letting the heavy silence hang in the crisp morning air. Jason shifted on his feet, his fake smile finally faltering. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I cut him off sharply. I worked 3 agonizing jobs to save up that money. I continued, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees. I served coffee until my feet bled. I saved every single penny for a year and a half. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday. On Monday morning, I went to the bank to get the cashier's check for the hospital. The teller looked at me with pity and told me the joint account was completely empty. There was 0 balance. The tall officer frowned deeply, his professional demeanor cracking as the horrifying reality of my words began to sink in. He glanced sideways at Jason. This man, I said, finally pointing a shaking finger directly at Jason, walked into the bank branch at exactly 9 in the morning and drained the entire account. He stole our life savings. He stole his own daughter's hearing. And do you know what he bought with that blood money? I shifted my finger and pointed directly at Brittany's smug, heavily powdered face. He bought 2 first-class tickets to Cancun and a week-long stay at a 5-star luxury beach resort for himself and his mistress. That woman right there! Brittany crossed her arms defensively, her face flushing bright red. We were already separating, Audrey. That money was half his. It was medical money for a deaf child, you evil witch, I shouted, dropping all pretense of politeness. I looked back at the cops. Because he stole that $5,000, the hospital immediately canceled the surgery. By the time I scraped together enough money a year later, the specialist told me the window had completely closed. The nerve damage was entirely irreversible. My daughter is permanently, profoundly deaf for the rest of her life because her loving father traded her ability to hear for a week of drinking margaritas on a beach. The reaction from the police officers was instant and visceral. The tall officer's jaw tightened tight enough to crack teeth. The shorter officer looked at Jason with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. They were fathers. They were public servants. The sheer depravity of what Jason had done made them physically recoil from him. Jason took a step back, realizing he was rapidly losing control of the narrative. That is ancient history, he stammered, his voice lacking all its previous arrogant authority. I was young. I made a financial mistake. But that does not change the law today. The tall officer exhaled a long, heavy sigh. He looked at me, all the harsh authority completely gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, genuine sympathy. Ma'am, the officer said softly, his voice heavy with regret. I am incredibly sorry to hear that. As a father myself, what you just told me makes me absolutely sick to my stomach. If it were up to me, I would tell this guy to get off your property immediately. He paused, tapping his heavy-duty belt with absolute frustration. But my badge dictates that I follow the letter of the law. A formal complaint was officially logged through the dispatch system. By state mandate, I have to lay eyes on the girl to close out the ticket. Please just let us step inside the living room. It will take 2 seconds. I promise I will get him out of here right after. I stood frozen. I knew the officer was right. If I fought the law, I would be arrested and Mia would be left unprotected. Jason would win. But I also knew I could not let Jason step foot in my sanctuary. I needed to stall. I just needed a few more minutes. Nobody is stepping into this house, I declared, firmly planting my feet even wider. Not until my legal representation arrives. Audrey, you do not have a lawyer on retainer. Jason scoffed, regaining a fraction of his smug confidence. Stop playing games and open the door. Right on cue, the sleek black headlights of a high-end luxury sedan turned onto our quiet suburban street. The polished black Mercedes glided smoothly to a stop right behind the parked police cruiser. The heavy engine purred for a fraction of a second before shutting off. The driver's side door opened, and a pair of perfectly shined Italian leather shoes stepped onto the pavement. It was Jamal, my 40-year-old brother-in-law, married to my younger sister Nora. Jamal was a partner at one of the most successful corporate law firms in the city. He was an African-American man who commanded absolute respect the moment he walked into any room. Today he was wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, a crisp white shirt, and a deep burgundy silk tie. He looked like a man who dismantled multi-million-dollar corporations for a living before his morning coffee. Jamal closed the heavy car door with a solid thud. He did not rush. He did not look angry. He walked up my cracked concrete driveway with the slow, deliberate stride of an apex predator who already had its prey cornered. He carried a sleek black leather briefcase in his right hand. Jason saw him approaching and immediately crossed his arms, puffing out his chest to look dominant. "Who is this guy?" Jason sneered, looking Jamal up and down with obvious disdain. "Did you actually hire a budget public defender, Audrey? This is a private family matter, buddy. You can turn around and drive that rental car right back to the agency." Jamal did not even blink at Jason's insult. He completely ignored Jason's existence, walking right past him, as if he were nothing more than a trash bag on the curb. Jamal stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, adjusted his suit jacket, and looked directly at the two police officers. "Good morning, officers," Jamal said, his voice deep and resonating with absolute legal authority. "My name is Jamal Carter. I am the legal counsel representing Audrey and her daughter Mia. I understand you are here regarding a wellness check initiated by this individual standing behind you." "Yes, sir," the tall officer replied, straightening instinctively. "We received a formal complaint through dispatch and need to visually confirm the safety of the dependent inside the residence." "I appreciate your dedication to public safety," Jamal said calmly, popping the golden latches of his briefcase. "However, this entire situation is a fabricated pretext designed to violate a strict court order. The man standing behind you is committing a felony at this exact moment simply by occupying this physical space." Jamal pulled out a thick folder made of heavy red cardstock. It was stamped with the official raised gold seal of the state family court. He handed it directly to the tall officer. Jason laughed a nervous, high-pitched sound. "What is he talking about? We have been divorced for 10 years. There are no active court orders. I have a fundamental legal right to check on my deaf daughter." Jamal finally turned his head to look at Jason. His expression was completely blank, devoid of any warmth or mercy. "You have absolutely no rights regarding this family," Jamal stated flatly. "What the officer is reading right now is a permanent, heavily reinforced restraining order. It explicitly bars Jason from coming within 500 feet of Audrey Mia or their primary residence." I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me. 5 years ago, when Jason briefly resurfaced demanding money after his first business failed, Jamal had secretly taken me to a judge. We spent weeks documenting Jason's past financial abuse and the severe emotional distress he caused Mia. The judge had granted a permanent injunction sealing it, so Jason would not be notified unless he attempted to make physical contact again. Jamal had planned for this exact day. Jason stepped forward, his face turning pale. "That is impossible. I was never served with any legal papers. You cannot enforce a restraining order I know nothing about." "Actually, I can, and they will." Jamal countered, his voice steady and cold. "The order was granted ex parte due to your documented history of financial extortion and abandoning a disabled minor. By showing up here today with police officers under false pretenses, you just activated the physical enforcement clause. You are currently trespassing on legally protected property. Brittany scoffed, grabbing Jason's arm. This is ridiculous. He is her biological father. A piece of paper does not erase his parental rights just because you say so. That specific piece of paper does exactly that, Jamal corrected her. It strips him of any presumptive right to visitation or guardianship until a superior court judge explicitly says otherwise. And given that he abandoned a deaf child and stole her medical funds, I highly doubt any judge will ever rule in his favor. The tall officer finished reading the document. He ran his thumb over the raised gold seal to verify its authenticity. He closed the red folder and handed it back to Jamal with a respectful nod. The officer turned around, his hand resting firmly on the handle of his standard issue baton. The sympathy he had shown me earlier was completely gone, replaced by hard professional enforcement directed entirely at Jason. "Sir, I need you to step back to the public sidewalk immediately." The tall officer barked, his hand resting firmly on his heavy baton. "You are in direct violation of an active protective order. If you do not comply right now, you will be placed under arrest for criminal trespass." Jason stumbled backward, his expensive cashmere sweater looking entirely out of place against his pale, panicked face. "Wait, this is a massive misunderstanding. I was just trying to see my daughter. I have fundamental parental rights. You have the right to remain silent." The officer shot back without hesitating. "I suggest you use it. Step back. Now." From the passenger side of Jason's parked car, the gray-suited lawyer from the art gallery emerged, jogging up the cracked driveway with his leather briefcase. He had apparently been waiting in the vehicle to see if the police would force their way inside. "Officers, please hold on," the lawyer said, holding up his hands defensively. "I represent the father. We have a pending petition for conservatorship filed this morning. This restraining order must be a clerical error." Jamal turned his head to look at the lawyer, his eyes narrowing into dark slits of pure contempt. The sheer gravity of his tone cut through the morning air like a sharpened blade. "Are you acting as his official legal counsel in this jurisdiction today?" Jamal asked smoothly. "Yes, I certainly am," the lawyer replied, puffing out his chest. "Excellent," Jamal said, taking a deliberate step down the porch stairs. "Because under Penal Code Section 240, advising a client to physically approach a protected residence constitutes conspiracy to violate a protective order. Furthermore, initiating a fraudulent wellness check falls under Penal Code Section 148.5, making a false report to law enforcement." The lawyer froze instantly, his confident posture rapidly deflating. Jamal took another slow step down. "Do you really want to risk your license to practice law in New York for a client who is bankrupt and cannot even afford your hourly rate? I filed a formal complaint with the Bar Association regarding your stunt last night. If you do not remove yourself and your client from this driveway in 10 seconds, I will personally see to it that you are charged as an accessory to stalking and harassment." The lawyer swallowed hard. The color drained entirely from his face. He rapidly calculated the massive legal risk he had blindly walked into. Without another word, he turned on his heel, practically sprinting back to the car. "Jason, we are leaving!" the lawyer yelled over his shoulder. "Get in the car and do not say another word." Jason stood frozen on the sidewalk, his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth might shatter. By now, the flashing police lights and loud shouting had drawn the attention of the entire neighborhood. Doors were opening down the block. People stepped onto their porches holding coffee cups, watching the wealthy businessman get publicly dismantled by my brother-in-law and 2 armed officers. Brittany realized people were staring. Her face flushed a dark, humiliating shade of purple. She pulled her designer jacket tight, desperately trying to hide her face. "This is so embarrassing, Jason," she hissed, pulling his arm. "Everyone is looking at us like criminals. Just get in the car before they arrest you." The shorter police officer pointed squarely toward their vehicle. "You heard your lawyer and your wife, sir. Get in your vehicle and vacate the premises immediately." If my cruiser is dispatched to this address again, you will leave in handcuffs. Do you understand me? Jason looked at the officers, then up at Jamal, who stood on the porch like an impenetrable fortress of legal power. Finally, Jason locked his furious eyes on me. The mask of the caring father was gone, leaving only the toxic predator. He took a step toward his car, yanking the door open. He pointed his finger directly at me. "This is not over, Audrey." Jason screamed, his voice echoing loudly down the quiet street. "You think you won today because of a technicality. You think you can hide my daughter and her money from me. I will drain every last cent you have. I will see you in family court." He slammed the car door shut. The tires squealed aggressively against the asphalt as he sped recklessly away, leaving a thick cloud of exhaust. The officers relaxed. The tall officer handed Jamal the folder. "Have a good morning, counselor. Mom, stay safe." "Thank you, officers," I said softly. Jamal turned to me, his features softening into a supportive smile. "You held your ground perfectly, Audrey. Now let us go inside. We have work to do before his next desperate move." We walked back into the quiet safety of my living room, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind us. Jamal set his sleek leather briefcase on the kitchen island and loosened his burgundy silk tie. He looked at me with a calculating expression. "Jason is a cornered animal," Audrey, Jamal warned, his voice steady. "We won the battle on the porch because I had the legal paperwork to back us up. But a desperate narcissist who is publicly humiliated does not just quietly accept defeat. He is utterly broke, backed into a financial corner, and he is going to change the battlefield. You need to mentally prepare yourself for a very public, very dirty fight." I nodded slowly, wrapping my trembling hands around a cold mug of coffee. I thought I was prepared. I thought the worst he could do was send the local police to my front door. I was completely wrong. 3 days later, the real nightmare began. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing in the kitchen packing a lunch for Mia before my shift at the gallery. My phone vibrated aggressively on the granite counter. The caller ID flashed with Jamal's name. I answered it immediately on speaker. "Turn on channel 4 right now," Jamal said, his tone devoid of his usual calm. "Do not say a single word, Audrey, just turn it on and watch." I grabbed the remote and flicked on the small flat screen sitting on the kitchen counter. The brightly colored logo of Good Morning Manhattan filled the screen. The upbeat morning music faded, revealing the highly popular host sitting on a plush white studio sofa. Sitting directly across from her, looking like the picture of a heartbroken loving father, was Jason. He was not wearing his expensive corporate suit today. Instead, he wore a soft blue cashmere sweater. He looked approachable, gentle, and deeply wounded. His hair was styled to look slightly messy, as if he had been losing sleep over his family trauma. "Jason, thank you for being brave enough to sit down and share your deeply personal story with us this morning," the host said with an exaggerated look of profound sympathy. "Thank you for having me," Jason replied, his voice soft and raspy. It was a sickeningly good theatrical performance. "I never wanted this private family issue to be broadcast to the public, but I am at the absolute end of my rope. I just want to see my little girl." I stood frozen, the butter knife slipping from my fingers and clattering onto the tile floor. "For our viewers, tuning in," the host noted solemnly, "Jason is the biological father of Mia, the brilliant 18-year-old deaf artist who just sold her first major painting for a record-breaking $3.6 million. But Jason, you have not been allowed to celebrate this milestone with her, have you?" Jason let out a heavy sigh, looking down at his hands. "No, I have not. My ex-wife Audrey has done everything in her malicious power to erase me from my daughter's life. When we divorced 10 years ago, I poured my energy into starting a tech company. My software startup is thriving today, bringing in millions in steady revenue. I have everything a man could possibly want materially. But none of that wealth matters without my daughter." He looked directly into the camera lens, his eyes shining with fake tears. "I do not need a single penny of Mia's money. I have plenty of my own. I just want to be a father to her again." But Audrey sees Mia as nothing more than a meal ticket. The chyron at the bottom of the screen flashed in bold yellow letters. A father's heartbreak, saving a disabled prodigy. It breaks my heart to say this on television, Jason continued shaking his head. But Audrey is entirely motivated by raw greed. She is a low-level gallery manager who suddenly realized she had a cash cow living in her house. She uses Mia's profound deafness as a psychological tool to control her every move. She makes that poor girl paint day and night, practically running an unregulated sweatshop in their living room, just so Audrey can live the lavish lifestyle she desperately wanted but never earned. The host gasped loudly in horror. You genuinely believe your daughter is being financially exploited because of her disability? I know she is, Jason stated firmly, his mask hardening into righteous anger. Audrey physically assaulted me at the art gallery last week when I tried to congratulate my own flesh and blood. She even filed a fraudulent restraining order to keep me legally away from the trust fund. She is a desperate gold digger, and I am going to family court to file for full financial conservatorship. I have to save my daughter before Audrey bleeds her completely dry. I could not breathe. My chest tightened painfully as the sheer scale of his calculated lies washed over me. He had brilliantly flipped the public script, painting himself as the wealthy savior and me as the abusive monster. I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned around to see Mia standing quietly in the doorway. She was staring intently at the television screen, having read the closed captions scrolling quickly at the bottom of the broadcast. I rushed over, reaching out to turn off the television. Mia, do not look at him, I pleaded, my hands shaking as I signed the words quickly. He is lying. We will fix this. Mia gently pushed my hand away from the power button. She did not look emotionally broken. She watched Jason's fake tears with the cold fascination of a scientist observing a desperate rat in a maze. She smoothly pulled her iPad from her side, typed a quick message, and held the screen up for me to read. Let him dig his grave deeper. I stared at the bold words on my daughter's screen. Let him dig his grave deeper. Her absolute confidence gave me a fleeting moment of strength. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my coat, and headed out the door to the gallery. But the moment I stepped off the subway in Manhattan, the true devastating power of Jason's televised lies hit me like a freight train. By the time I walked through the heavy glass doors of the gallery, the front desk was in a state of total unmitigated panic. The main phone line was ringing incessantly, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the usually serene and quiet atmosphere. My assistant, a young art student, looked up at me with sheer terror in her wide eyes. She was clutching a stack of pink message slips that looked thick enough to be a novel. It is everyone, Audrey, my assistant whispered frantically, handing me the massive pile of paper with trembling fingers. They all saw the morning broadcast. The phones have not stopped ringing since the show aired. They are completely freaking out and demanding to speak with ownership. I flipped through the messages, my heart sinking all the way to the floor. These were not just casual inquiries from random people. These were our most elite high-net-worth clients, the billionaires who bought million-dollar sculptures and funded our lavish seasonal exhibitions, and every single one of them was calling to sever ties immediately. The first slip was from the estate manager of our largest buyer. He demanded we instantly remove his client's rare impressionist collection from our upcoming weekend showcase. The second slip was from a prominent socialite who had suddenly decided to cancel her private viewing tonight. The reason across the board was entirely unanimous. The elite art world thrives on complete discretion, privacy, and pristine public images. Jason had effectively turned my name into a toxic, scandalous tabloid headline, and nobody in high society wanted their expensive art associated with a woman publicly accused of abusing a disabled prodigy for cash. Audrey, get into my office this exact second. The booming voice of the gallery owner, Mr. Wallace, echoed aggressively across the polished hardwood floor. He was a notoriously strict, profit-driven man who tolerated absolutely zero public drama. I took a deep breath, braced myself for the heavy impact, and walked into his glass-walled office. He slammed the door shut behind me so hard the window panes rattled in their frames. "Do you have any idea what is happening out there?" Mr. Wallace demanded, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He pointed a shaking finger at his own computer screen, which was currently displaying a massive digital news article featuring Jason's fake tear-stained face. "I have lost 3 of my biggest consignments in the last hour alone. My wealthy investors are calling me directly asking why my lead manager is currently the prime villain of a national morning show." "Mr. Wallace, you know me," I pleaded, trying desperately to keep my voice steady. "I have worked loyally for you for 6 years. You know exactly how much I sacrifice for Mia. That man abandoned us a decade ago and is just trying to steal her money now that she is successful. Everything he said on that television program is a complete and utter fabrication." "It does not matter if he is lying," Mr. Wallace shouted, pacing aggressively behind his heavy oak desk. "This is the luxury art market. Perception is our only reality. If the affluent buyers think you are a predator, then my gallery becomes complicit simply by keeping you on the payroll. I am running a multi-million-dollar business, not a charity for victims of bad divorces." He stopped pacing and looked at me with cold, ruthless finality. "I am suspending you immediately without pay. And if you do not get this completely resolved and your name cleared in the media by the end of the week, I am firing you permanently. Now pack up your desk and get out the back door before the paparazzi figure out where you work." The ground completely dropped out from beneath me. I walked out of his office in a daze, suspended without pay, fired by the end of the week. Jason had already used his slimy lawyer to freeze the $3.6 million in Mia's account. Now he had successfully destroyed my sole source of income. Without my weekly paycheck, I had no way to buy groceries, pay the impending mortgage, or keep the lights on in our house. I gathered my things into a small cardboard box, my hands shaking violently. Jason had calculated this perfectly. He wanted to starve me out. He knew that if he cut off every single financial lifeline I possessed, I would eventually be forced to crawl to him and surrender my daughter's trust fund just to survive. The walls were rapidly closing in, and as I stepped out into the cold New York alleyway, I realized exactly how close I was to losing absolutely everything. I did not go home. I could not face my daughter after just losing my job. Instead, I carried my small cardboard box straight to the subway and rode it down to the financial district. I needed answers, and I needed them immediately. I walked into the modest law offices of Winston & Associates. Winston had been my primary family lawyer for years, helping me navigate the minimal legal protections I could afford when Jason first vanished. He was an older, meticulous man who rarely raised his voice or showed emotion, but when his receptionist ushered me into his wood-paneled office, he looked physically ill. I set my box on the floor and dropped into the leather chair across from his heavy mahogany desk. "Winston, I just got suspended from the gallery," I said, my voice shaking with exhaustion. "Jason went on national television and painted me as an abusive monster. My boss fired me to save the gallery's reputation. I have absolutely no income coming in, and the trust fund is entirely frozen. We need to file an emergency motion to lift that injunction today." Winston did not reach for his notepad. He did not offer his usual reassuring smile. Instead, he slowly slid a massive, heavily bound stack of legal documents across his desk toward me. "Audrey, losing your job is terrible," Winston said, his voice grave and heavy. "But I am afraid it is the absolute least of our problems right now. I received this formal petition from Jason's new legal team just an hour ago. They completely bypassed Jamal's corporate jurisdiction and went straight into state family court." I stared at the intimidating stack of paper, a cold dread washing over me. "What is it?" I asked. "He already froze the money. What else could he possibly do?" "They dug up your original divorce filing from 10 years ago," Winston explained, removing his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You both filed for an expedited annulment in Clark County, Nevada right after he left you. You signed the papers. He signed the papers. We submitted them to the court. but there was a catastrophic clerical error at the county clerk's office. A missing notary stamp on the final decree coupled with a presiding judge who retired the very next morning. The paperwork was placed in a suspended administrative file and never officially processed into the state registry. I blinked my exhausted brain, struggling to process his words. What exactly does that mean, Winston? It was 10 years ago. We have lived entirely separate lives. It means, Winston said, leaning forward and resting his hands flat on the desk, that in the eyes of the law, your annulment was never legally finalized. Technically, legally, you are still legally married to Jason. The room suddenly started spinning. My stomach dropped into my shoes. That is completely impossible, I gasped, gripping the armrests of my chair. He is married to Brittany. They had a massive wedding in the Hamptons. If we are still married, that makes him a bigamist. It makes his current marriage completely fraudulent. Winston nodded grimly. Yes, his marriage to Brittany is legally invalid. But Jason does not care about his marital status with Brittany right now. He is weaponizing this administrative error to completely hijack your financial autonomy. Because you are technically still his legal wife, he is aggressively claiming his marital right to 50% of all your acquired assets. And far worse, he is asserting his absolute right as a joint legal guardian over Mia and her newly acquired estate. I felt like I was suffocating. He abandoned her. I whispered, my vision blurring with panicked tears. He stole her medical money. He cannot just swoop in and claim half of everything she earned. He is petitioning the court to act as her primary financial conservator under the guise of being her legally married, deeply concerned father. Winston explained patiently. Since there is no official divorce decree stripping him of his parental or marital rights, the temporary injunction freezing the $3.6 million is going to be upheld by the family court judge. Jason does not even need to win a trial to destroy you, Audrey. He just needs to freeze the money indefinitely. His lawyers are already filing endless discovery motions that will take years to untangle. I looked at the thick pile of legal documents sitting heavily on the wooden desk. Jason had engineered a flawless, deeply malicious trap. He knew I had absolutely no paycheck anymore. He wanted to purposefully drain my non-existent legal fund until I was completely starved into agonizing submission. He wanted me to eventually hand over my daughter's entire financial future just to save my home from foreclosure. I sat in the heavy leather chair, the silence of Winston's office pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. The walls were lined with thick legal volumes that represented thousands of hours of arguments, but none of them could save me right now. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since Jason kicked down the doors of the art gallery, the adrenaline completely drained out of my body. It was replaced by a bone-deep, crushing exhaustion. I was not a high-powered corporate executive. I was not a legal mastermind. I was just a mother who had spent 10 years running on empty, trying to build a safe world for her deaf child. And now that world was collapsing around me. I buried my face in my hands, and a loud, jagged sob ripped through my throat. I did not care that Winston was watching. I cried for the job I had loved and lost in a matter of minutes. I cried for the cruel injustice of a system that allowed an abusive man to weaponize his abandonment. I cried because I knew Mia was sitting at home trusting me to protect her, and I was failing entirely. Winston handed me a box of tissues, his expression lined with genuine sympathy. "Audrey, we can fight this," he said softly. "I can file an emergency motion for spousal support to get you some living expenses while we litigate the annulment. We can depose him. We can subpoena his business records." "And how long will that take, Winston?" I asked, wiping my face with a trembling hand. 6 months? A year? 3 years? You just said it yourself. He wants to drag this out. He wants to bleed me dry. I do not have a salary anymore. I cannot afford to pay your hourly rate for the next 3 years to fight a tech CEO in family court. I cannot afford my mortgage next month. "He is not a billionaire," Winston corrected gently. "He just plays one on television." It does not matter what he actually is. I sobbed, shaking my head frantically. It matters what he can do to us. He is going to drag Mia's name through the mud every single day. He is going to subpoena her medical records. He is going to force her to sit in a courtroom and watch the man who stole her hearing argue that she is financially incompetent. I will not let him put my daughter on a witness stand. I will not let him turn her life into a public circus. I took a deep, shuddering breath, making the hardest decision of my entire life. Draft a settlement agreement. I told Winston, my voice dropping to a hollow whisper. Offer him $500,000. Offer him $500,000 from the trust fund tax-free right now. The only condition is that he signs a finalized divorce decree, relinquishes all parental rights, drops the conservatorship petition, and walks out of our lives forever. Winston leaned back in his chair looking at me with deep concern. Audrey, do not do this. If you offer him $500,000, you are showing him that his extortion tactics work. He is a predator. If he smells blood in the water, he will not take the $500,000. He will push for $1 million. He will push for everything. Just make the offer, Winston. I pleaded, fresh tears spilling over my eyelashes. Please, I just want my daughter to live in peace. If $500,000 is the ransom price for our freedom, I will gladly pay it. Just make him go away. Before Winston could argue any further, my phone buzzed violently inside my purse. I pulled it out, my screen lighting up with a new text message from an unsaved number. I opened it and my stomach violently lurched. It was a picture from Brittany. She was standing in the bright sunlight of a luxury car dealership, leaning casually against the hood of a brand new cherry red Porsche. She was wearing designer sunglasses and holding up the keys, a massive triumphant grin plastered across her face. Beneath the picture was a text message that made my blood boil and my heart shatter all at once. Shopping for my new daily driver, the message read. Jason says we can afford the upgrade since our finances are about to get a massive boost. Hope you are enjoying the unemployment line, Audrey. Do not worry, we will make sure Mia is taken care of when she comes to live with us. I dropped the phone onto Winston's desk as if it had burned my hand. The image of the red Porsche stared up at me, a glaring metallic symbol of their absolute victory. They were already spending Mia's money in their heads. They were openly mocking my ruin. I slumped back in the leather chair, feeling utterly, completely defeated. The fight was gone. The fire in my chest had been smothered by a blanket of legal paperwork and sheer financial terror. I stared blankly at the ceiling, waiting for Winston to type up the surrender documents, knowing I had just lost the most important war of my life. The rhythmic clacking of Winston's computer keyboard sounded like a countdown to my absolute financial ruin. He was rapidly typing the settlement agreement, legally surrendering $500,000 of my daughter's money to a monster just to buy our freedom. I kept my eyes fixed blindly on the ceiling, paralyzed by the sheer crushing weight of my failure as a mother. Just as Winston reached for his mouse to print the official surrender document, the heavy oak door of the office violently swung open. I jumped in my seat. Jamal stepped into the room, his expression darker than a thunderstorm, and right behind him was Mia. I had explicitly left Mia at home to keep her safe from this legal nightmare. Seeing her standing in a Stark law office clutching her iPad and glaring at the printed legal documents scattered across Winston's desk broke my heart all over again. "What are you doing here?" I asked quickly, wiping the humiliating tears from my face. "Jamal, you should not have brought her into this environment. We are finalizing a settlement to make him go away. Winston is printing the offer right now. We are giving Jason $500,000 so he leaves us alone." Jamal did not say a single word to me. He walked straight over to Winston's desk and firmly pressed his large hand down on the keyboard, stopping the printing process immediately. "You are not giving that toxic parasite a single cent," Jamal stated, his voice radiating pure, unyielding authority. Winston adjusted his glasses, looking highly defensive. "Jamal, she is technically still married to him due to a clerical error in Nevada. He has a legitimate claim to freeze the trust. If we fight this blindly in court, He will bleed Audrey dry and put Mia on the witness stand. Mia walked slowly over to the desk, her face entirely devoid of fear. She looked at the drafted settlement displayed on the glowing computer monitor. Then she looked down at my phone, which was still displaying the picture of Brittany posing with her new red Porsche. Mia's jaw tightened visibly. Her dark eyes hardened into something entirely unrecognizable. It was not the look of a frightened teenager. It was the look of a seasoned general evaluating a battlefield. Without any warning, she raised both of her hands and brought them down incredibly hard against Winston's solid mahogany desk. The explosive smack echoed aggressively through the quiet room, making both Winston and me flinch backward. Mia had our absolute undivided attention. She stepped back, squared her shoulders, and began signing in American Sign Language with rapid, aggressive precision. Her movements were sharp and commanded total silence from every adult in the room. Jamal stood beside her, watching her hands closely. When she finally paused, Jamal looked directly at me and translated her words with chilling calmness. She says she would rather burn the money to ash than give Jason a single dime to fund his pathetic life. Sweetheart, you do not understand the cruelty of the legal system, I pleaded, standing up and desperately reaching for her hand. He found a massive legal loophole. If we do not pay him off today, he will drag you into a highly publicized courtroom. He will force you to undergo grueling psychological evaluations just to prove you can handle your own money. I cannot let him put you through that public trauma. I will not let him treat you like you are broken. Mia gently pushed my hand away. She shook her head and began signing again intensely. Jamal translated immediately, his own lips curving into a slow, highly dangerous smile. She says she is not broken, and she is certainly not hiding from a coward. While you were at the gallery today, Mia and I had a very long conversation about corporate structure. I did some quiet digging into Jason's so-called thriving tech startup. Audrey the man is drowning in $8 million of toxic corporate debt. His company is a completely hollow shell on the verge of total bankruptcy. He is desperate for Mia's money because his angry creditors are literally knocking on his door. I stared at Jamal, the confusing pieces suddenly falling perfectly into place. The fake tears on morning television, the aggressive ambush at the elite art gallery. It was not just pure greed. It was absolute frantic desperation. Mia tapped the wooden desk again to completely regain my attention. She locked her intense eyes with mine and delivered her final decisive sequence of signs. Jamal translated his deep voice, dropping an octave, ringing with lethal finality. She says he wants to play businessman. Let him play. Uncle Jamal set up the LLC. We are not paying a ransom, we are building a trap. Exactly 72 hours after that defining moment in Winston's office, the trap was officially set. We moved the battlefield from the dusty family law clinic to Jamal's territory. His corporate law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. The conference room was a massive, intimidating space featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying view of the city skyline. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the center of the room. I was nowhere near the building. That was the first phase of Mia's brilliant psychological strategy. My deliberate absence was designed to give Jason the intoxicating, dangerous illusion of total victory. At exactly 2 p.m, the heavy glass doors swung open. Jason strolled into the conference room, looking like a man who had just conquered the entire world. He was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored gray suit, a silk tie, and an expression of pure, unfiltered arrogance. Brittany walked right beside him, clutching a designer handbag, and wearing a triumphant smirk that made my stomach churn just thinking about it. Trailing close behind them was the exact same gray-suited lawyer from the art gallery, carrying his signature leather briefcase. Jason stopped at the edge of the table. He looked at Jamal, who was sitting perfectly straight in a high-backed leather chair, dressed in a flawless navy suit. Then Jason looked at Mia, who was sitting quietly next to her uncle, her iPad resting flat on the polished wood in front of her. Jason's eyes quickly scanned the rest of the massive room, searching the corners. When he finally realized I was not hiding anywhere, his chest puffed out visibly. "Where is Audrey?" Jason asked, pulling out a chair and sitting down with exaggerated swagger. Do not tell me she finally cracked under the pressure. I heard through the grapevine that the gallery suspended her without pay. It is a real shame she had to learn the hard way that you cannot fight a legitimate father in family court and expect to win. But I suppose it is better she stayed home today. This is a high-level business meeting, and she never had the stomach for real corporate negotiations anyway. Brittany let out a sharp mocking laugh as she took the seat next to him. She probably could not afford the subway fare down here, Brittany sneered, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. Or maybe she is too busy packing up her house before the bank forecloses on it. Either way, it is a massive relief not to have her hysterical energy ruining the vibe of this extremely important meeting. Jamal did not react to their vicious taunts. He did not defend my honor or raise his voice. He simply opened a sleek black leather folder in front of him and folded his hands neatly over it. Audrey formally granted me complete legal proxy to negotiate the terms of Mia's estate on her behalf. Jamal stated his voice a smooth, impenetrable wall of professionalism. We are here to listen to your proposed settlement terms, Jason. Let us skip the theatrics and get straight to the numbers. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the expensive mahogany table. He looked at Mia, offering her a condescending, deeply fake smile, before turning his predatory gaze back to Jamal. The terms are incredibly simple, counselor. My daughter just secured $3.6 million. As her biological father and her soon-to-be legal financial conservator, I am demanding an immediate transfer of 50% of that total sum into an account under my exclusive control. That is $1.8 million transferred by the end of the business day. And that is just the beginning. Jason's lawyer chimed in, opening his briefcase and pulling out a stack of heavily highlighted documents. Moving forward, my client demands a mandatory joint management clause for all of Mia's future artistic endeavors. Every gallery showing every private commission, every single piece of artwork she sells must be approved by Jason, and he will collect a standard 20% management fee off the top of every single transaction. It is only fair, Jason added smoothly, leaning back and crossing his arms in a display of supreme confidence. Audrey completely failed to monetize Mia's talent properly for a decade. I have the business acumen to turn her into a global brand. With my connections in the tech and venture capital worlds, I can double her net worth in 2 years. I am doing this for her own good. She needs a strong, experienced hand guiding her career. Throughout this entire sickening speech, Mia did not flinch. She sat perfectly still, her dark eyes locked onto Jason's face, reading his lips with surgical precision. She watched the greedy twitch of his jaw and the arrogant gleam in his eyes. She was analyzing every single weakness he was exposing. Jamal nodded slowly, absorbing the outrageous demands without a single hint of outrage. 50% of the current assets and a 20% perpetual management fee, Jamal repeated, making a brief note on his legal pad. You are certainly asking for a massive slice of the pie, Jason. But before we can even consider signing over that level of financial control, we need to address a fundamental issue regarding your basic comprehension of this arrangement. Jason let out a short, dismissive laugh, waving his hand as if Jamal had just told a bad joke. My comprehension, Jason repeated, shaking his head in mock amusement. I run a tech firm, Jamal. I think I can handle whatever boilerplate legal jargon you have cooked up in that folder of yours. Just show me where to sign so we can get this over with. I have a tea time at 4, and I really do not want to be late. But instead of waiting for Jamal to pull out the paperwork, Jason leaned across the heavy mahogany table. He locked his eyes onto Mia, completely dropping his aggressive corporate persona and replacing it with an exaggerated, patronizing expression. It was the exact same face a person might make when talking to a very slow toddler. Mia's sweetheart, Jason said, speaking incredibly slowly and over-enunciating every single syllable. He exaggerated the movements of his mouth, mistakenly believing that speaking louder and stretching his words would somehow make his deaf daughter understand him better. Daddy knows this is all very confusing for you, There are a lot of big numbers being thrown around today. Millions of dollars. That is a lot of money to keep track of, right? Mia did not blink. She sat perfectly upright in her leather chair, her hands resting lightly on either side of her iPad. You do not need to worry your pretty little head about any of this business stuff anymore. Jason continued, his voice dripping with condescension. You just keep focusing on your beautiful little paintings. Daddy is going to take over all the hard work. I am going to deal with the banks and the contracts, so you can just play with your colors. Does that sound good to you? Mia simply stared at him. Her face was an absolute mask of cold calculation. She did not nod. She did not shake her head. She just watched his lips move with the detached fascination of someone studying a lower life form. Her fingers began to tap rhythmically against the glass screen of her tablet. Getting absolutely no reaction from her, Jason sighed heavily and turned his attention back to Jamal. He gestured toward Mia with his thumb. Make sure you explain the big words to her later. Jason instructed, his tone shifting back to sharp arrogance. Break it down into simple concepts she can actually grasp. She just paints Jamal. She does not understand finance. She has spent her entire life locked in a tiny house with Audrey. She has absolutely zero concept of wealth management, taxes, or corporate liability. She needs me to protect her. Brittany leaned in, placing her manicured hand over Jason's arm. It really is a tragedy, Brittany added, looking at Mia with a sickening pout. She is legally an adult, but mentally, she is completely unequipped for the real world. Audrey really stunted her growth. It is a good thing we stepped in when we did. Leaving $3 million in the hands of a disabled teenager is basically child abuse. We are practically performing a public service. The sheer audacity of their insults hung heavily in the chilling air of the conference room. They were sitting right across from a certified prodigy, an 18-year-old girl who possessed more raw intellect and strategic vision than both of them combined, and they were openly treating her like an incompetent child. They honestly believed that because Mia could not hear their voices, she was entirely powerless. They had absolutely no idea that the silent girl sitting across from them was the sole architect of their impending destruction. Mia did not show a single ounce of anger. She simply lowered her gaze back to her iPad and continued typing. Every keystroke was deliberate and precise. She was finalizing the digital transfer protocols for the LLC, expertly maneuvering the financial chess pieces into their final lethal positions. Jamal watched Mia type for a brief second before turning his attention back to Jason. He did not defend Mia's intelligence. Correcting Jason would only ruin the element of surprise. The greatest weapon they possessed right now was Jason's blinding, arrogant underestimation of the daughter he had abandoned. I will be sure to break the concepts down for her, Jamal said smoothly, his voice betraying absolutely no emotion. But as I mentioned before, we finalized your 50% ownership stake and your management fees. There is a standard financial competency protocol we must follow. If you want to manage her estate, you have to prove you are solvent. Jason rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by the delay. Fine. What exactly do you need from me today? Let us get this over with right now. Jamal did not mirror Jason's rushing impatience. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who held all the winning cards. He reached into his sleek black leather folder and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. He placed his index finger on the top edge and smoothly slid it across the vast expanse of the polished mahogany table. The document glided perfectly, coming to a dead stop exactly 1 inch from Jason's folded hands. What is this? Jason asked, looking down at the paper without making a move to pick it up. He let out an exasperated sigh, clearly annoyed that his path to millions was being delayed by more paperwork. Another temporary injunction. I thought you said Audrey surrendered. Audrey has surrendered her fight against your conservatorship petition, Jamal confirmed smoothly, leaning back in his leather chair. However, setting up a corporate partnership to manage a multi-million-dollar estate requires strict adherence to corporate law. The entity we are establishing to house Mia's wealth requires all managing partners to be financially solvent and free of crippling personal liabilities. In order to legally establish your 50% stake and grant you the 20% management fee you are demanding, you must first prove your financial competence. Jason's lawyer leaned forward, adjusting his glasses as he finally picked up the document. He scanned the text, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. To act as a fiduciary for your daughter, Jamal continued, his voice echoing cleanly in the massive room, you cannot hold any outstanding debts owed directly to her primary caregiver. A judge will not grant you conservatorship or approve this LLC partnership if there is an active financial dispute between the two parents. That document is a legally audited statement of arrears. Jason snatched the paper from his lawyer's hands, his eyes darting to the bold number printed at the very bottom of the page. It outlines 10 years of unpaid child support, Jamal explained calmly. We calculated the standard state-mandated monthly minimums for a decade, adjusted it for annual inflation, added the statutory interest for delinquent payments, and included a highly specific reimbursement clause for the $5,000 you unlawfully withdrew from the joint medical account 10 years ago. The total outstanding debt comes to exactly $250,000. Brittany let out a sharp gasp, practically jumping out of her chair. $250,000. Are you out of your mind? You expect us to pay $250,000 for a kid you have been hiding from us for 10 years? Jason, this is a blatant extortion attempt. They are just trying to squeeze you for cash before you take control of the real money. Jason stared at the number, his jaw clenching tightly. He looked at his lawyer. Can they actually enforce this? The gray-suited lawyer sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Legally speaking, yes. Child support arrears do not simply vanish, Jason. And Jamal is absolutely correct about the fiduciary requirements. If we go before a family court judge to finalize your conservatorship, the very first thing Audrey's legal team will do is present this exact debt. The judge will instantly freeze your application until the arrears are completely settled. If you want to bypass the court battle and finalize the 50% LLC partnership today, clearing this debt is a mandatory prerequisite. You have to prove you are a solvent partner. For a moment, the room was completely silent. I knew from Jamal's later account that Jason looked genuinely trapped. He was secretly drowning in $8 million of toxic corporate debt. He did not actually have $250,000 lying around in his checking account, but his ego, coupled with the blinding promise of walking away with $1.8 million by the end of the day, completely overrode his common sense. Jason looked at Mia, who was still staring at him with that chilling, unblinking calculation. Then he looked at Jamal. A slow, deeply arrogant smirk spread across his face. He actually threw his head back and laughed loudly, the sound echoing off the floor to ceiling windows. I see what this is. Jason chuckled, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. This is Audrey's last pathetic grasp for relevance. She knows she lost the war, so she sent you here to beg for a massive parting gift. She wants $250,000 as a consolation prize because I am about to take over the real fortune. Jason pulled out his checkbook and clicked his silver pen. Writing this check secures my total dominance over Audrey. He grinned. He had zero idea he was writing his own death sentence. Jason flattened the heavy checkbook against the polished mahogany table, the silver pen gleaming brightly under the recessed lighting of the conference room. He did not hesitate for a single second. He wrote out the numbers with grand, sweeping strokes, completely captivated by his own theatrical performance. He wanted Jamal and Mia to see him as a financial titan, an untouchable man who could easily drop $250,000 without breaking a single sweat. He ripped the check from the binding with a sharp, aggressive tear and tossed it carelessly across the wide table. Consider her debt fully paid in full, Jason announced, leaning back in his leather chair and crossing his arms. Tell Audrey to buy herself something nice, Maybe a new roof for that rundown shack she lives in, or a reliable used car so she can drive to the unemployment office. Now bring out the real partnership contracts. I have proven I have the liquid capital to play at this elite level. What Jason did not know was that Jamal had already run a deep forensic background check on his recent financial activities. I learned later from Jamal exactly where that $250,000 came from. Jason did not pull it from a thriving tech startup or a healthy personal savings account. His business was completely dead in the water. To get his hands on that specific cash, Jason had gone to a highly predatory, unregulated private lending firm just 24 hours earlier. He had taken out a massive high-interest bridge loan using his failing business equipment as fraudulent collateral. He was literally borrowing from dangerous loan sharks just to buy his way into Mia's trust fund, fully believing he could pay them back by the end of the day with her newly acquired wealth. Jamal picked up the check, gently inspecting the signature and the routing numbers. He did not smile. He did not show any sign of triumphant satisfaction. He simply placed the check inside his black leather folder and pulled out a second document. "Excellent," Jamal said smoothly, his professional tone never wavering for a moment. "However, standard corporate compliance requires one final piece of documentation before we establish the LLC partnership. I need you to sign this declaration of financial competency and solvency." Jamal slid the single-page document across the table. Jason's lawyer immediately snatched it up, his eyes scanning the dense legal text with practiced speed. "What is this now?" Jason groaned, rolling his eyes in exaggerated annoyance. "Are you going to make me take a math test before I can manage my own daughter's money?" "It is a standard legal protection for the estate," Jamal explained calmly. "By signing that declaration, you are officially swearing under penalty of perjury that you are of sound mind, that you are entering into this financial partnership entirely free of any external duress, and most importantly, that you possess the independent financial solvency to fulfill your fiduciary duties. It essentially prevents any future claims that you were financially coerced or legally incapacitated when you agreed to manage Mia's assets." The gray-suited lawyer finished reading the page and nodded in agreement. He turned to Jason. "It is a standard boilerplate clause, Jason. They just want to make sure you cannot sue them later, claiming you did not understand the financial risks of the partnership. Since you just wrote a $250,000 check clearing your arrears, you clearly meet the legal threshold for solvency. You are perfectly good to sign it without any risk." Jason did not even bother to read the words on the page. He was too blinded by the absolute certainty that he was minutes away from securing $1.8 million. He grabbed his silver pen and aggressively scribbled his signature on the bottom line of the declaration, pushing it back across the table toward Jamal. "There," Jason said, clapping his hands together briskly. "I am solvent. I am competent. I am entirely free of duress. Are we finally done with the petty roadblocks, Jamal? My wife and I have a celebration dinner booked at a Michelin star restaurant tonight, and I would really like to get this finalized before my reservations expire." Brittany beamed proudly beside him, already adjusting her designer jewelry and picturing the massive shopping spree she was going to embark on the very next morning. Jamal took the signed declaration and placed it securely next to the $250,000 check. That single signature was the most vital piece of the entire trap. By signing that specific document, Jason had legally amputated his own defense. When the walls finally closed in on him, he would never be able to stand before a federal judge and claim he was bankrupt, desperate, or legally unfit when he signed the LLC paperwork. He had just officially established himself as a competent, solvent businessman, making a fully informed corporate decision. "We are officially done with the prerequisites," Jamal confirmed, closing the first folder and reaching for a much thicker, heavier binder resting near Mia's iPad. "We can now move directly to the formation and partnership agreement for Mia Art, LLC." Mia slowly stopped tapping her glass screen. She sat back in her chair, her dark eyes locking onto the heavy binder. The deadly bait had been completely swallowed. It was finally time to spring the ultimate trap. Jamal opened the thick binder resting near Mia's iPad. The heavy metal rings clicked sharply in the quiet conference room, a sound that signaled the beginning of the end for Jason. Jamal moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who held all the winning cards. He pulled a crisp stack of densely printed legal documents from the binder, aligning the edges perfectly against the polished mahogany table. As requested, Jamal began his voice, a perfectly flat baritone that betrayed absolutely no emotion. We have entirely bypassed the messy public family court conservatorship process. Instead, we have structured a highly specialized formal corporate entity to manage all of Mia's current and future financial assets. The entity is officially registered with the state of New York as Mia Art LLC. Jason leaned forward instantly, his eyes narrowing with intense interest. And the money from the gallery auction. Every single penny, Jamal confirmed, locking eyes with Jason. The entire $3.6 million from the gallery sale has been successfully cleared and legally transferred into the primary operating bank account of Mia Art LLC. The LLC now holds exclusive rights to those funds, as well as the intellectual property rights to all of Mia's future artwork. Jamal placed his hand on the stack of papers and smoothly slid the top document toward Jason's lawyer. What you are looking at is the Master Operating Agreement. It dictates the ownership structure and the distribution of management power. As per your aggressive demands this afternoon, Audrey has agreed to step away entirely. The contract designates Mia as a 50% equity owner, and it designates you, Jason, as the other 50% equity partner. Brittany gasped loudly, the sound echoing sharply off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. She grabbed Jason's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into the fabric of his expensive gray suit jacket. "Oh my God. Jason, we did it," she whispered fiercely, though she made no real effort to hide her soaring excitement. "Half of the entire estate is yours. We won." Jason could not contain his smug, victorious grin. He looked at Jamal, then at Mia, his chest swelling with toxic, unearned pride. "I told you Audrey would fold," Jason boasted, adjusting his silk tie with a sickeningly arrogant flick of his wrist. She always was incredibly weak when it came to high-pressure situations. She knew I would drag her through a brutal court battle and completely ruin her reputation, so she took the easy way out. It is honestly the smartest financial decision she has made in her entire pathetic life. The gray-suited lawyer flipped eagerly to the second page of the document. "Look right here, Jason," the lawyer said, tapping a highly official-looking bank statement attached as an exhibit. "This is the verified proof of funds. The LLC operating account currently holds exactly $3,600,000 in liquid cash. The routing numbers match the escrow transfer from the gallery auction house perfectly. The money is entirely real. It is sitting right there waiting for you to claim it." Jamal turned a page in his own binder, refusing to let their celebration interrupt his methodical presentation. Furthermore, Jamal added, making sure to keep his tone utterly professional, Section 4 of the operating agreement specifically grants you the 20% management fee on all future sales exactly as you requested. You will act as the exclusive managing partner of the LLC. You will have the total authority to sign gallery contracts, negotiate private art commissions, and handle the day-to-day financial operations of the business. Jason was hearing everything he had ever wanted to hear. The promise of immediate massive wealth completely short-circuited whatever remaining critical thinking skills he possessed. He was so intensely focused on the massive pile of liquid cash that he completely failed to ask himself why a ruthless, high-powered corporate lawyer like Jamal was handing over a literal fortune without putting up a massive fight. "This is absolutely perfect," Jason said, his eyes practically glowing with unfiltered, monstrous greed. "This is exactly what I deserve. I am her father. I am the only one equipped to handle this kind of massive capital. With my extensive business background, I will have this LLC generating $10 million a year in no time. Brittany leaned closer to Jason, her eyes wide with materialistic hunger. We need to call the realtor as soon as we leave this building, she urged him. That luxury penthouse in Tribeca is still on the market. We can use the LLC funds for a massive cash down payment since it will officially be your money now. Think of the parties we can host. Mia watched them celebrate their unearned victory. She did not display a single hint of anger, frustration, or sadness. She sat perfectly still in her heavy leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching them gorge themselves on the poisonous bait. Her profound silence was the loudest thing in the entire room, but Jason and Brittany were far too deafened by their own raging greed to hear the massive trap snapping shut around them. Jamal picked up a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen from his desk set. He extended it across the vast expanse of the table toward Jason. If the terms are agreeable, Jamal said smoothly, we just need your signature on the final page of the operating agreement. Once you sign that line, you are officially the 50% owner of Mia Art LLC with all the rights, privileges, and legal liabilities that come with it. Jason did not hesitate. He reached across the table, his fingers trembling slightly with the pure thrill of impending wealth, and snatched the heavy gold pen from Jamal's hand. He was staring at the signature line, as if it were the finish line of a marathon. Jason held the heavy gold fountain pen just a fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper. The metal nib hovered over the solid black line that would legally bind him to Mia Art LLC forever. His breathing was shallow and rapid. Just as he pressed the tip of the pen down ready to drag the dark ink across the page, a hand shot out and gripped his wrist. "Wait," his lawyer instructed sharply, his voice tight with sudden professional caution. "Do not sign anything yet. Let me review the liability parameters one last time." Jason let out an exaggerated groan, rolling his eyes, as he dropped the pen onto the mahogany table. "Are you kidding me right now?" Jason complained, throwing his hands up in sheer frustration. "We already went through the term sheets. We saw the bank statements. The money is sitting right there in the operating account. You just confirmed that the $3.6 million is fully liquid and ready to be managed. What else is there to possibly look at?" The gray-suited lawyer adjusted his glasses, flipping past the bank statements and digging deep into the dense, heavily worded center of the operating agreement. "The money is completely verified, yes." The lawyer murmured, his index finger tracing a lengthy paragraph buried on page 42. "But this specific indemnification structure is highly unusual for a standard family management company. Look at Section 8, Paragraph B right here. It outlines an aggressive piercing of the corporate veil clause." Jason leaned over, looking at the block of text with absolute disinterest. "What does that even mean in plain English?" Jason demanded, tapping his fingers impatiently against the polished wood. "It means that by accepting the role of managing partner and taking a 50% equity stake, you are voluntarily waiving your limited liability protections," the lawyer explained, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. "Usually, an LLC protects your personal assets from the debts of the company. But this specific clause explicitly states that as the majority managing partner, you are assuming unlimited personal liability for any and all debts acquired by Mia Art LLC." Jason scoffed loudly, waving his right hand to dismiss the lawyer's entirely valid warning. "So what? It is a brand new company. It was literally formed 48 hours ago. It does not have any debts. The only thing sitting in that LLC is a massive pile of cash from my daughter's painting. There are no corporate loans, no unpaid vendors, no mortgages. It is a completely clean slate with $3.6 million in liquid capital. But you are agreeing to back the entity with your own personal assets," the lawyer cautioned, looking up at Jamal, who sat perfectly still, revealing absolutely nothing. "If the LLC somehow incurs a massive debt down the line, this contract gives the creditors the legal right to bypass the company and seize your personal bank accounts, your luxury vehicles, and your real estate properties. You are exposing yourself to infinite financial risk. Jason let out a sharp, deeply mocking laugh that echoed in the room. I am the one making the financial decisions. I am not going to let the LLC go into debt. Jamal just threw that boilerplate garbage in there to make Audrey feel like she got some sort of legal victory. It is a completely irrelevant safety net to make a hysterical mother feel secure. Brittany violently elbowed Jason in the ribs. She leaned over, her face flushed with pure, unadulterated greed. Stop trying to justify your exorbitant hourly rate by inventing imaginary problems, Brittany hissed at the lawyer. There is nearly $4 million sitting right there on the table. Do you see the way that deaf girl is looking at us? If you keep stalling and arguing over stupid legal hypotheticals, they might pull the entire deal. Jason looked across the table at Mia. She was indeed holding her iPad, her thumbs hovering over the digital keyboard. Her face remained a chilling, unreadable mask. To Jason's arrogant mind, her silence was not a calculated trap. It was the hesitant, easily manipulated silence of a disabled teenager who might change her mind if the adults kept arguing. He adjusted his grip on the pen, entirely blind to the financial slaughterhouse waiting for him on the next page. Jason flipped the thick packet of paper directly to the final signature line. He did not read a single word of the complex indemnification clause his lawyer had just warned him about. He just saw the blank space that stood between him and $3.6 million. With a grand sweeping motion that bespoke pure arrogance, he dragged the heavy gold fountain pen across the page. The dark black ink soaked into the crisp white paper, legally sealing his fate with an aggressive flourish. He pushed the master operating agreement back across the polished mahogany table toward Jamal, tossing the expensive pen down beside it. "It is done," Jason declared, leaning back in his leather chair and letting out a massive breath of relief. "I am officially the managing partner." Brittany let out a high-pitched squeal of delight. She reached down into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a chilled bottle of premium vintage champagne. They had actually brought their own alcohol to a corporate law firm to celebrate their impending robbery. She quickly untwisted the wire cage and pushed her thumbs against the cork. With a loud, echoing pop that bounced off the glass walls of the conference room, the cork shot up and hit the acoustic ceiling tiles. White foam spilled over the green glass neck of the bottle, splashing onto the polished mahogany wood. Brittany quickly produced 3 crystal flutes from her bag, setting them carelessly on the table and filling them to the brim with bubbling champagne. She handed one to Jason and pushed the other aggressively toward Jamal. "We should make a toast," Brittany announced loudly. "To new beginnings, massive success, and keeping wealth where it belongs." Jason raised his glass high, a sickening smile stretching across his face. "To Mia Art L.L.C." Jason toasted, looking directly at his deaf daughter with a condescending wink. "May it bring everything we ever wanted." Neither Jamal nor Mia made a single move to acknowledge the toast. Mia simply sat in her heavy leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching the bubbles rise in the glass, sitting untouched on the table. She looked at Jason the way a scientist observes a doomed test subject. Jamal looked at the crystal flute pushed toward him with an expression of mild distaste, as if someone had just placed a dead insect on his immaculate desk. "I do not drink while I am working," Jamal said smoothly, his voice completely devoid of the celebratory warmth Jason expected. "And my work here is just beginning." Jamal picked up the signed master operating agreement. He meticulously checked Jason's signature, ensuring the dark ink was completely dry and the legal binding was absolute. He placed the document inside his black leather folder and closed it. The sharp snap of the metal clasp sounded like a heavy steel vault locking shut. "The paperwork is fully executed." Jamal confirmed his tone, dropping an octave, losing all of its previous accommodating politeness. "You are now the 50% equity owner and managing partner of Mia Art LLC. You have officially assumed all unlimited personal liability for the corporate entity." Jason took a large gulp of his champagne, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Excellent. Now hand over the banking credentials so I can initiate the first wire transfer to my personal accounts." I need to get moving on some high-yield investments immediately. Jamal did not reach for any bank credentials. Instead, he reached into his tailored suit jacket pocket and pulled out a small black remote control. He aimed it at the ceiling and pressed a single button. The motorized hum of heavy machinery immediately filled the quiet conference room. A massive high-definition projector screen began to slowly unroll from a hidden compartment in the ceiling, descending right in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows and completely blocking out the bright afternoon sun. The sudden loss of natural light caused the room to plunge into a cool, stark shadow. The atmosphere in the room instantly turned freezing. The celebratory bubbles in Jason's champagne glass suddenly seemed incredibly out of place. Jason's gray-suited lawyer stiffened in his chair, his legal instincts finally screaming that something was terribly wrong. Jason lowered his glass, his arrogant smile faltering for the very first time since he walked into the building. "What is this?" Jason asked, his voice losing its confident edge. "We just signed the papers. What else is there for us to look at today?" Jamal folded his hands on the table. "We are going to look very closely at your immediate future, Jason," Jamal said softly. Jamal turned his attention to his sleek silver laptop resting beside his legal binders. He typed a quick password and hit the enter key. The high-definition projector hummed louder, throwing a bright, glaring image onto the massive screen at the front of the room. It was a scanned copy of the official auction invoice from the gallery, showing the final hammer price of $3.6 million. Next to it was a highly confidential banking wire transfer receipt. "Look closely at the origin of the funds," Jason Jamal instructed, his voice echoing in the chilled room. "You were so blinded by the total amount that you never once stopped to question who on earth would pay nearly $4 million for a debut painting from an 18-year-old artist. You just assumed your daughter was an overnight global sensation, and you were entitled to cash in on her newfound fame." Jason squinted at the screen, his arrogant posture slowly deflating. The name of the purchasing entity was listed in bold black letters as the Theodore Blackwood Irrevocable Trust. The color instantly drained from Jason's face. He dropped his champagne glass onto the mahogany table. "That is my father's name," Jason whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden sickening realization. "My father died 3 years ago." "Yes, he did," Jamal confirmed coldly. "And before he passed, he and I had several very long, very detailed legal consultations. Your father despised what you became, Jason. He watched you abandon your deaf daughter. He watched you drain her medical funds to take your mistress on a luxury vacation. He was entirely disgusted by your profound lack of basic human decency. So when he drafted his final estate plans, he explicitly disinherited you. He left his entire fortune exclusively to his only granddaughter, Mia." Brittany let out a sharp, panicked breath, looking frantically between Jason and the projector screen. "Wait!" Brittany stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "If her grandfather left her all that money, why did she sell the painting? Why did not she just inherit it normally through a standard bank transfer?" "Because we knew exactly how Jason's greedy mind operated," Jamal explained, turning his sharp gaze toward Brittany. "If the trust simply transferred $3.6 million directly into Mia's personal bank account, Jason would have immediately filed a frivolous probate lawsuit claiming he was entitled to a portion of his father's estate. He would have tied the money up in court for years. We needed a perfectly legal, untouchable vehicle to move the liquid capital directly into Mia's control, right as she turned 18. Jamal clicked a button, and the slide changed to show the painting on the auction block. "The auction was a perfectly orchestrated maneuver," Jamal continued. "Mia's painting is brilliant, but the bidding war was entirely manufactured by the appointed trustees. The trust legally purchased the artwork successfully, washing the inheritance money into a clean, indisputable commercial transaction. You did not just hijack a gallery auction, Jason. You walked right into a carefully designed financial funnel." "We did not trick you into anything," Jamal countered smoothly. "We simply presented a glowing pile of money, and your own toxic greed did the rest of the heavy lifting. You were so desperate to steal from your ex-wife and your disabled daughter that you completely bypassed standard corporate due diligence. Jason's lawyer buried his face in his hands, letting out a heavy, defeated groan. He realized exactly what was happening, but it was far too late to stop the bleeding. Jamal leaned forward, locking eyes with Jason. Think about what you just did today, Jason. You were so desperate to steal this specific pile of cash that you went to unregulated private lenders. You took out $250,000 loan at a criminally high interest rate, putting your own failing business up as collateral just to pay off 10 years of neglected child support. You bankrupted yourself to buy a 50% management stake in your own father's money. Money that your father specifically structured to ensure you would never ever get to touch. Jason looked like he was going to be physically sick. The sheer humiliation of being outsmarted by a dead man, his ex-wife, and his silent daughter paralyzed him. But the horror was only just beginning. Now that we have established where the money came from, Jamal said softly, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Let us talk about where it is going next. Jamal did not give Jason a second to recover from the realization that he had just bought into his own disinheritance. Jamal pressed the small black remote control again. The high-definition projector hummed softly, and the bright image on the massive screen shifted instantly. The bank statements and trust name vanished, replaced by the sleek logo of Jason's supposedly thriving software startup. Underneath the corporate logo was a highly detailed, deeply damning spreadsheet. Jason stared at the screen, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. What is this? He demanded, his voice cracking under the mounting pressure. Where did you get my financial documents? Those are highly confidential. There is nothing confidential about public bankruptcy filings and creditor liens, Jamal replied, leaning back in his leather chair and steepling his fingers. You went on national television just a few days ago and proudly proclaimed that your tech company was a massive success. You told millions of viewers that you were a wealthy, highly capable businessman who just wanted to protect his disabled daughter. But the numbers on this screen tell a vastly different story, do they not? Brittany squinted at the spreadsheet, her manicured nails tapping nervously against her designer handbag. Jason, what is he talking about? She asked, her voice tight with rising panic. Our company is fine. We just leased that new office space in Silicon Valley. You leased it using fraudulent collateral, Jamal corrected her sharply, his eyes locked onto Jason. Your husband has been running a hollow shell game for the past 3 years. The tech startup has absolutely zero proprietary software, zero active major contracts, and zero incoming revenue. What it does have, however, is an astronomical amount of toxic corporate debt. To be precise, Jason, you currently owe your various investors, vendors, and private creditors exactly $8 million. The number echoed in the chilled conference room like a death sentence. $8 million. Brittany recoiled from Jason, her face twisting in horror. You told me we were rich, she hissed at him, her voice dripping with sudden venomous betrayal. You told me the company was preparing to go public next quarter. You are $8 million in debt. Shut up, Brittany, Jason snapped desperately, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table. He looked at Jamal, his eyes wild and cornered. This proves nothing. Corporate debt is completely normal for a growing tech startup. We are just in a heavy restructuring phase. I have investors lined up. I can manage my own liabilities. You could have managed them? Jamal agreed smoothly, if your creditors were still willing to wait. But they were tired of waiting, Jason. They knew your company was a sinking ship. They were preparing to write off the entire $8 million as a total catastrophic loss. And that is exactly where my incredibly brilliant niece stepped in to make her very first corporate acquisition. Mia stopped tapping on her iPad. She set the device face down on the polished wood and looked directly at Jason. Her dark eyes were completely void of any mercy. Jamal clicked the remote one final time. The screen shifted to display a legally binding debt acquisition contract. Over the past 48 hours, while you were busy trying to terrorize Audrey and destroy her career in the media, Mia Art LLC was conducting real business, Jamal explained, his voice ringing with absolute lethal authority. We reached out to every one of your angry creditors. We offered to buy your toxic debt from them for pennies on the dollar. Since they thought they would get absolutely nothing from your impending bankruptcy, they enthusiastically agreed to sell. Jason's lawyer let out a sharp, choked gasp, finally understanding the massive, inescapable scale of the trap. "Oh my God!" the lawyer whispered, pushing his chair back from the table as if the paperwork might suddenly catch fire. "That is right," Jamal said, offering a cold, terrifying smile. Mia Art LLC used a fraction of the $3.6 million to purchase every single one of your outstanding corporate loans. This LLC now owns the entirety of your $8 million debt. You do not owe those random tech investors anymore, Jason. You owe this specific company. You owe Mia. The sheer gravity of the situation crashed down on Jason like a collapsing building. He looked at the signed master operating agreement resting on the table. He looked at the $250,000 check he had written just minutes ago. He had walked into this room believing he was a predator about to feast on a helpless victim. Instead, he had willingly walked directly into a perfectly constructed financial slaughterhouse. He was officially a hostage to the very daughter he had discarded 10 years ago. The gray-suited lawyer stared blankly at the projected image of the debt acquisition contract. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of pale gray. His fingers went entirely numb, and the expensive silver pen he was holding slipped from his grasp. It hit the polished mahogany table with a sharp, hollow clatter that sounded like a judge dropping a final gavel. Jason the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of professional terror and profound disbelief. "Do you understand what you just did?" Jason could not speak. He could only stare at Jamal, his mouth opening and closing as his brain misfired desperately, trying to process the magnitude of the disaster. "Let me clarify the legal mechanics for you, Jason," Jamal offered, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the heavy table. His voice was smooth, calculated, and entirely lethal. 10 minutes ago, your corporate lawyer explicitly warned you about Section 8, Paragraph B of the Master Operating Agreement. He warned you about the indemnification structure. He told you that by signing that document as the managing partner, you were voluntarily piercing the corporate veil. Jamal picked up the signed agreement, tapping his index finger against Jason's rushed signature. Normally, corporate law protects a business owner from personal financial ruin. Jamal continued, pacing his words, so every single syllable struck like a physical blow. If a company goes under, the creditors can only take the business assets. But you were so unspeakably greedy, so desperate to snatch your daughter's money, that you blatantly ignored your own legal counsel. You signed a contract assuming unlimited personal liability for Mia Art LLC. Jason swallowed hard, sweat suddenly beading heavily on his forehead. "So what?" Jason choked out, his voice a frantic, high-pitched rasp. "The LLC owns my company debt. I owe the LLC $8 million. But I am the managing partner of the LLC now. I can just forgive the debt. I can just write it off." "You cannot write off a debt when you only own 50% of the equity," Jamal corrected him, instantly, his eyes narrowing. "You have a partner, and your partner is Mia. According to the bylaws you just signed, any debt forgiveness requires a unanimous vote from all equity shareholders. Do you honestly think Mia is going to vote to forgive the man who stole her medical money?" Mia picked up her iPad. She did not even look at Jason as she typed. She hit a button, and the computerized voice of her text-to-speech application echoed coldly through the room. "Vote denied. Pay your debts." Jason flinched as if he had been physically struck. Jamal allowed a hard, merciless smile to touch his lips. "Because your tech startup is completely bankrupt and cannot pay the $8 million it owes to Mia Art LLC, the LLC now has the legal right to collect that debt. And because you explicitly pierced the corporate veil by signing this specific operating agreement today, you legally tied your own personal finances to the LLC's collections." Jamal stood up, his towering frame casting a long dark shadow over Jason. You personally owe Mia Art LLC $8 million, Jamal declared, his voice booming with the righteous fury of a decade of unpaid justice. You owe your daughter $8 million. And since you just signed a sworn declaration stating you are completely financially solvent, we have the immediate legal right to seize every single asset you possess to satisfy that massive debt. Brittany let out a loud, hysterical sob, burying her face in her hands. We are taking the luxury penthouse you live in, Jason, Jamal listed, ticking the items off on his fingers. We are taking the cars you drive. We are taking your investment portfolios, your retirement accounts, and any offshore accounts you mistakenly thought were hidden. We are draining every single bank account attached to your name. You walked into this building trying to steal $3.6 million from a disabled teenager. You are walking out of this building with absolutely nothing. You have successfully bankrupted yourself. Jason collapsed back into his leather chair, his entire body trembling violently. The arrogant, wealthy tech executive was completely gone. In his place sat a ruined, broken man who had just willingly signed away his entire existence. He looked at the $250,000 check sitting in Jamal's folder. That was his last piece of borrowed leverage, and he had handed it over with a smile. This is illegal, Jason whispered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an escape route that did not exist. This is a setup. It is fraud. It is a legally binding contract, Jamal corrected him sharply. A contract you signed eagerly, competently, and against the explicit advice of your own lawyer. You built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, Jason. All we did was open the window and let the wind blow. Brittany slowly lowered her hands from her face. Her expensive mascara was smeared beneath her eyes, but the expression underneath was not one of sorrow or wifely support. It was pure, unadulterated, vicious rage. She stared at Jason, her chest heaving, analyzing him not as a partner, but as a catastrophic financial liability. You are $8 million in the hole, Brittany whispered, her voice trembling with absolute fury. You told me we were buying a Tribeca penthouse today. You told me this was a multi-million-dollar acquisition. You dragged me in here to watch you completely bankrupt us. Brittany, sweetheart, please just calm down, Jason pleaded, reaching a shaking hand out toward her. I can fix this. I know venture capitalists. I can restructure the debt. We just need to hire a new legal team and fight the indemnification clause in court. With what money, Jason? Brittany screamed, her voice echoing violently off the glass walls. You just signed away everything we own. Our bank accounts are going to be frozen by the end of the day. You borrowed money from loan sharks just to sit at this table. You are not a tech CEO. You are a broke, pathetic fraud, and I am not going down with you. Brittany reached for her left hand and violently yanked the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. She did not hand it back to him. She threw it directly at his chest. The heavy platinum ring bounced off Jason's suit jacket and hit the polished hardwood floor with a sharp metallic ping, rolling away into the shadows. Without another word, she grabbed her designer tote bag, turned on her high heels, and sprinted out of the conference room, the heavy glass doors slamming shut behind her. Jason watched her abandon him, his jaw hanging open in utter shock. He turned to his gray-suited lawyer, desperate for any shred of legal salvation. Do not even look at me, Jason, the lawyer stated coldly. He snapped his leather briefcase shut with a loud final click. You explicitly ignored my direct legal counsel and signed a catastrophic contract against my strict warnings. I am officially withdrawing as your legal representation, effective immediately. Good luck. The lawyer turned on his heel and marched out the door, leaving Jason completely and utterly alone with his executioners. The sheer reality of his isolation finally broke Jason. The arrogant posture, the condescending smirk, the tech executive persona, it all instantly evaporated. He slid out of his heavy leather chair and dropped directly onto his knees. He crawled across the expensive carpet until he was right at the edge of the mahogany table, looking up at his 18-year-old daughter. Mia, please. Jason begged, tears streaming down his face, completely abandoning all his pride. I am your father. I gave you life. You cannot do this to me. I will be ruined. I will go to prison if those private lenders do not get their money back today. Just tear up the contract, please. I will walk away. I will never bother you or your mother ever again. Just rip the paper up and let me go. Mia looked down at the man groveling on the floor. She did not smile. She did not show an ounce of pity. She simply picked up her iPad, typed a single sentence, and turned the screen around so he could read it perfectly. You traded my hearing for a vacation. Enjoy your bankruptcy. Before Jason could let out another pathetic sob, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open one final time. It was not Brittany returning to save him. It was 3 men and 1 woman dressed in sharp, dark windbreakers. The bold yellow letters on their jackets read FBI. They were flanked by 2 armed federal marshals. Jason froze on his knees, his eyes widening in absolute terror. Right on schedule, Jamal noted, calmly adjusting his silk tie and standing up to greet the federal agents. Special Agent Vance, thank you for arriving so promptly. Jason scrambled backward, pressing his back against the base of the conference table. What is this? He panicked, his voice a frantic whisper. Jamal, what did you do? Family court disputes do not involve the federal government. We are not here about family court, Jamal corrected him smoothly. We are here about wire fraud and bank fraud. Remember that $250,000 check you wrote to clear your child support arrears? You acquired those funds through a fraudulent bridge loan using a phantom equipment registry as collateral. When I ran the routine background check to verify your solvency, I discovered the fabricated loan applications. I immediately forwarded those documents to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. Lying to an unregulated loan shark is dangerous, but submitting forged federal tax returns to secure the wire transfer is a severe federal crime. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Jason, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The agent announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. Jason pressed his cheek against the cold, polished wood of the mahogany table, his breath fogging the pristine surface. His custom-tailored suit was rumpled, his arrogant posture completely shattered by the heavy hands of the federal marshals holding him down. He twisted his neck, straining furiously to look across the massive table. His desperate, terrified eyes locked directly onto Mia. Mia, please. Jason choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Tell them to stop. You have the money now. You have the $3.6 million. You can pay off the bridge loan. You can hire a defense attorney for me. I am your father. I am family. You cannot just let them take me to federal prison. I will not survive in there. Mia did not flinch. She did not show a single shred of sympathy for the man who had stolen her hearing to fund a luxury vacation. She picked up her iPad from the table, her movements deliberate and perfectly calm. She typed a few quick words, her fingers flying across the digital keyboard with absolute finality. She stood up, walked around the massive conference table, and stopped right in front of Jason. The federal marshals held him steady, so he was forced to look directly at the glowing screen. I am deaf, not stupid, the screen read in bold black letters. Have a nice life, Jason. Jason let out a gutted, agonizing wail. It was the sound of a narcissist finally realizing that his own reflection had completely destroyed him. The lead FBI agent grabbed him by the shoulder and roughly hauled him to his feet. You have the right to remain silent, the agent recited, his voice completely devoid of pity as they dragged Jason toward the heavy glass doors. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they marched Jason out of the conference room, his desperate sobbing faded down the long corporate hallway, eventually swallowed entirely by the chime of the elevator doors. I was waiting in the expansive marble lobby on the ground floor of the skyscraper. Jamal had strictly forbidden me from being in the room to ensure Jason felt entirely victorious right up until the trap snapped shut. But I could not stay home. I needed to see it end. I stood near the massive revolving glass doors, nervously clutching a paper coffee cup, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs. Then the private executive elevator dinged. The polished metal doors slid open. Two armed federal marshals stepped out first, flanking a completely broken, weeping man in handcuffs. It was Jason. His face was pale and streaked with tears, his expensive suit wrinkled and ruined. He looked so small, so utterly pathetic, stripped of all his fake wealth and toxic bravado. He did not even notice me standing there at first. But right before they pushed him through the revolving doors, Jason looked up. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. For 10 years he had looked at me with nothing but sneering contempt. But in that fleeting moment, there was no arrogance left, only absolute crushing humiliation. He dropped his head, unable to maintain eye contact, as they marched him out into the bustling New York street and shoved him into the back of a waiting black federal vehicle. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the lobby windows, and then the car sped away, disappearing into the city traffic forever. A second elevator arrived a moment later. The doors opened and out walked Jamal, looking as immaculate and unbothered as ever. Walking right beside him was my incredible, brilliant daughter. Mia spotted me instantly. A massive, genuine smile broke across her face. She dropped her black tote bag and ran across the marble floor, throwing her arms around my neck. I buried my face in her shoulder, holding her tighter than I ever had in my entire life. The crushing weight that had been suffocating me for 10 long years instantly lifted. The fear was completely gone. We were finally safe. Jamal walked up to us, handing me the black leather folder containing the executed LLC documents. "The estate is fully secured, Audrey," Jamal said, a rare warm smile softening his sharp features. "And Jason is entirely bankrupt and currently on his way to federal holding. I believe it is officially time to celebrate." I looked at my brother-in-law, tears of pure gratitude welling in my eyes. "Thank you, Jamal, for everything." He nodded respectfully. "Do not thank me. Thank the architect." He gestured to Mia, who gave me a proud, confident thumbs up. We walked out of the corporate building together, stepping into the bright, warm sunlight of the city. The nightmare was finally over, and a beautiful, quiet new chapter was just beginning. They thought my daughter's silence was a weakness. They didn't know it was just her letting them talk their way into a trap. Have you ever seen a toxic person destroy themselves with their own greed? Let me know in the comments.